first time Princess Vaelira called Jonah Vale weak. She did it before 17 alien generals, 3 imperial war priests, and a gallery of nobles who had come to watch a human embarrass himself. She stood on the obsidian command dais of the dread carrier Asterion, silver hair braided with battle gems, violet eyes cold with the certainty of inherited victory, and looked down at the human officer in his plain dark uniform as though someone had left a servant in a throne room. Jonah had no claws, no plated hide, no venom glands, no second heart, no ancestral war chant humming in his blood. He looked small beneath the blue war lights, almost unfinished beside the armored species around him. Vaelira turned toward the hologram of the border moon Charon, where red enemy markers were already crossing civilian zones, and said, "Let the human observe from the rear lines. I would rather not explain to Earth why their fragile envoy was crushed under a beast's foot." The generals laughed politely. The priests clicked their mandibles. The nobles smiled behind jeweled masks, but Jonah only studied the map, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression quiet in the way deep water is quiet. Vaelira expected wounded pride or a soft, diplomatic objection. Instead, he asked, "How many war beasts are they bringing?" General Sorak expanded the enemy projection with open contempt. 800 at least, bone maulers, iron-tusk chargers, ridgeback devourers, and 12 royal dreadbeasts. Bred by the Varkal brood for siege warfare, Jonah nodded once, and the old scars beneath his collar shifted pale against his skin. Then he pointed toward a gray cut in the moon's western mountains and said, "Evacuate the left valley before dawn, or everyone there dies." No one laughed after that, but only because the insult was too strange to process. Vaelira stepped down from the dais until her shadow crossed Jonah's boots. The left valley was protected by impossible terrain. The central pass was the only sane attack route. The western shale cliffs were too steep for armor, walkers, or anything larger than a scout crawler. She had studied war since childhood and had led fleets before Jonah's species had been granted full imperial alliance. "Do not mistake fear for strategy." "Human," she said. Jonah did not lower his gaze. "Beasts will hit the central shields until smoke blinds your targeting. Then the living herds will climb the western shale over the dead. They will not need to win there, only make you turn your guns." Sorak barked that animals did not think like that. Jonah answered, "Not animals. Weapons taught to suffer until obedience feels like instinct." Vaelira dismissed him and kept the plan unchanged. Yet long after he left the chamber, her eyes returned to the western shale, a dead slope of shattered stone where no disciplined army should have been able to move. She told herself she was being cautious, not persuaded. And when dawn broke over Charon and the first Varkal wave slammed into the central shields like an avalanche of teeth, she almost forgot him. From the bridge of the Asterion, the battle looked clean, elegant, imperial, gold shield lines holding, plasma batteries cutting red trenches through charging herds, officers calling ranges with calm precision. Then smoke from the central killing field thickened and drifted west. 12 minutes later, a young sensor officer screamed that heavy movement was descending through the shale. By the time Vaelira understood, the left valley was already dying. The valley contained hospital domes, refugee transports, fuel depots, and lightly guarded evacuation corridors. The Varkal beasts poured into it under smoke cover, dragging themselves through landslides, using weaker bodies as bridges, ripping open the moon's gray skin with claws and tusks. Bone maulers 6 meters tall smashed through marine shields. Iron tusk chargers overturned medical crawlers. Ridgeback devourers moved low and fast between tents where civilians had been told they were safe. Vaelira ordered reserves, but the central pass was still under pressure. She ordered orbital fire, but the valley was packed with non-combatants. She ordered the nearest command detachment to hold. And the answer came back through static: "We cannot hold." For the first time in her life, the princess felt the humiliation of being too late. And beneath it, sharper than fear, the knowledge that the human had been right. Then one heat signature walked toward the beasts. At first, Vaelira thought it was a sensor error. A single figure moving out from behind a collapsed hangar. Not retreating, not hiding, moving forward. Jonah Vale wore no Imperial armor, only a matte combat coat sealed at the throat. A compact rifle across his chest, a sidearm at his thigh, and a narrow metal case in his left hand. He looked absurdly small against the dust and charging bodies. General Sorak snarled that someone should drag him back before Earth accused them of negligence. But no one moved. Jonah set the case on the hood of a broken cargo loader and opened it with careful hands. Inside were not bombs, not shield cores, not some secret Terran relic. Only 12 dull silver cylinders, each the length of his palm. He placed them in a crescent in the dust, pressed his thumb to each one, then stood alone inside the curve, while 3 bone maulers turned toward him. Their control cords flashed red. Somewhere beyond the ridge, Varkle handlers ordered them to tear him apart. The beasts charged, the ground shook, civilians screamed from the transport ramps. Marines shouted for Jonah to fall back. Vaelira gripped the bridge railing hard enough to score the metal. Jonah waited until the last 5 seconds, raised his rifle, and the cylinders erupted. Not with fire, but with sound. A low-layered pulse that bent the audio feed and made the bridge windows vibrate. The bone maulers did not stop because of pain. They stopped because something older than pain moved through them. Their claws dug trenches in the dust. Their jaws hung open. Their collars burned red as handlers punished them to continue. But the beasts trembled and would not cross the line. They were not confused. They were afraid. One bone mauler lowered its armored skull until its crown almost touched the ground. Another backed away with a broken, keening no Imperial scholar had ever recorded. The third shook so hard the control cable along its spine split open. Jonah fired 3 shots, precise and cold, not into their eyes, not into their hearts, into their collars. Sparks burst. The beasts flinched as if waking from a nightmare, then scattered into the rocks, crushing 2 handler drones as they fled. The valley channels went silent in stunned disbelief, because the human had not defeated the monsters by killing them. He had made them refuse, and when the next wave rushed him, 50 beasts, then 100, he shifted the cylinders with 1 boot, widened the crescent, and kept firing only at callers. Vaelira demanded Jonah's true file, not the diplomatic summary. The intelligence officer hesitated once, then sealed human records opened across her private display. Earth had sent Jonah as an observer, but before that he had served in the Martian silence. A war so brutal his own people named it after the years when no survivor could speak of it. The enemy in that war had used engineered terror fauna, creatures bred past hunger, bred past pain, bred until only command signals remained. Jonah's unit had learned to break the chain not by overpowering the creatures, but by returning fear to the animal buried beneath the weapon. He had crossed breeding pits, corpse fields, and cities where modified beasts hunted by heartbeat. He had carried signal lures through tunnels made of bone. And when rescue came after 43 days, only Jonah and 1 medic were alive. The medic died before landing. Jonah returned 8 months later as an instructor, because he understood that wars ended faster when monsters remembered they had once been afraid. Asterisk on the battlefield, the Varkle handlers increased punishment through the collars. Pain outputs spiked until beasts screamed blood from their mouths. But the human sound devices pulsed deeper, more personal. Less like technology than memory forced into the air. The second wave broke unevenly around him, some collapsing, some fleeing, some turning on the drones that tried to regain control. Imperial Marines recovered first. Because soldiers understand miracles only after someone gives them an order. A captain shouted for support, fire around the human. Not on him. And blue plasma stitched the dust at Jonah's flanks. The defensive line reformed behind him. Refugee transports lifted one by one. Wounded civilians were dragged through smoke. And still Jonah stood at the mouth of the valley like a locked door. Small, shaking, impossible. Then the royal dreadbeasts arrived. 12 shadows emerged from the western smoke. Each as large as an assault shuttle, armored in black scale and living metal. Horns like broken cathedral spires, mouths chained shut until release. Furnace hearts glowing beneath rib plates. These were not ordinary war stock. These were siege kings, bred with command engines braided through their nervous systems and fear centers supposedly cut away before birth. Even the freed bone maulers fled from their scent. General Sorak exhaled with ugly relief and said, "Now the human dies," but Jonah only stepped back once. Enough to show that he understood what approached. He reached inside his coat and drew out an old recording wafer wrapped in worn cloth. His thumb rested on its cracked edge. And his face changed, not with fear of death, but with the pain of opening a grave he had carried alone for years. The civilians needed for more minutes. The Marines begged him to retreat. Vaelira found herself whispering the same command from orbit, though he could not hear her. Fall back. But Jonah looked once toward the hospital dome, where children watched through fractured glass, then slid the wafer into the central cylinder and spoke a name. No microphone clearly caught. The sound that followed was not loud. At first, it was only a child crying under static. Then animal breaths, hundreds of them, trapped and wounded. Then a human voice ordering someone to run. Then metal doors closing. Then silence so complete that every officer on the Asterion stopped breathing. Vaelira did not understand the language, but she understood the cost. This was not a weapon. This was a memory sharpened until even monsters could feel it. The first royal dreadbeast stopped. Its claws sank into the dust. The second crashed into its flank and screamed as its mouth chain snapped. The third began tearing at the control plates embedded in its own skull. Handlers transmitted rage, hunger, obedience, pain, but the recording moved beneath those signals, reaching whatever remnant still lived under all that engineering. One by one, the dreadbeasts turned their massive heads away from Jonah and toward the ridgeline where Varkal handler towers pulsed like red nerves. The handlers increased pain to lethal levels, and that was the final mistake. The monsters remembered who had hurt them. They charged uphill, not toward the civilians, not toward the Marines, but toward their masters. Signal towers vanished under horns and fire, bunkers split open like fruit, drones scattered and died against the shale. Smaller beasts followed in a frenzy of liberated terror, and the Varkal trap became a stampede back into its own throat. What happened after that was not victory yet, but it was the moment victory became possible. Vaelira descended to the valley as soon as the first breach stabilized. Her shuttle landed in a storm of ash, smoke, and freed beasts moving in confused herds beyond the perimeter. None approached the human line. Marines parted for her, not with ceremony, but with the stunned silence of people who had seen the shape of history change. She found Jonah kneeling beside a fallen iron tusk charger, while a medic cut the remains of a collar from its neck. The beast was enormous, scarred, trembling, and alive. Jonah had one hand on its muzzle and was murmuring to it in a language Vaelira did not know. The tone needed no translation. When he saw her, he tried to stand, because she was royal, and the gesture shamed her more than any accusation could have. "Do not rise," she said, her voice rougher than she intended. For several seconds, the princess, who had called him weak, could not speak. At last she looked at the broken collars, the silver cylinders, the rifle that had spared more beasts than had killed, and the human whose hands shook now that no one needed him to be steady. "I was wrong about you," she said. Jonah wiped dust and blood from his chin with the back of his glove. "Most people are," he answered, not proudly. Not bitterly, just tired. Vaelira wanted to ask how a fragile species had learned such terrible courage. But the question died in her mouth, because she finally understood that humans had not survived the galaxy by being strongest in the ways empires measured strength. They were not the largest, hardest, fastest, or oldest. They survived because they studied what broke, including themselves, then built a path through it. Beyond the perimeter, one royal dreadbeast stood on the ridge against the burning sky. Wounded, unchained, vast enough to darken the smoke, its head turned back toward Jonah. Not in obedience, not affection, but recognition. As if one survivor had seen another across a field of ruin, then the beast bent its front limbs and bowed. No imperial doctrine had room for such a sight. No priest had words prepared for it. No general could make it fit inside a report. But every soldier in the valley saw it, and the story began to change before the smoke cleared. They would say the princess insulted him. The Empire laughed at him. The war beasts came to kill everyone. And then one human stepped forward. They would say he did not roar, did not boast, did not need to. When the beast refused to face him, the whole war changed. 3 days later, Vaelira summoned Jonah to the same obsidian chamber where she had first humiliated him. The nobles were gone. General Sorak had been removed pending inquiry, and the remaining commanders stood silent as Jonah entered bandaged, exhausted, and visibly uncomfortable with attention. Vaelira descended from the dais before he could reach it, then bowed the full royal bow reserved for sovereign allies and battlefield dead. A sound moved through the chamber. Not laughter this time, something sharper and afraid. She straightened and said, "Commander Vale, Earth sent you as an observer, but I ask you to advise the Imperial defense. Because you saw what our pride made invisible?" Jonah looked at the battle map where the Varkal front had already begun retreating from 3 moons after their own beasts turned unstable. Then said, "I will advise under 3 conditions. Freed beasts are not slaughtered for convenience. Captured handlers are tried for sentient war crimes. And no one recreates my recordings without human oversight," Vaelira answered. "Granted." A war priest dared ask why mercy should be extended to creatures that had killed Imperial citizens. Jonah turned toward him, and the room seemed to cool. "Because the human was not angry. Anger would have been easier," he said. "A weapon is guilty only if it had a choice. And the moment it gets one, what it does next matters. If your empire cannot understand the difference between a monster and a prisoner, it will keep building both." No one laughed. No one clicked in disapproval. Vaelira watched the sentence strike her commanders like a blade without blood, and realized Jonah had not merely saved a valley. He had infected the Empire with a human idea, the dangerous kind. The kind that looked gentle until it reached the foundations. Vaelira began attending the human briefings herself. Not from the dais, but from the floor beside captains and medics. She watched Jonah teach Imperial soldiers how to read hesitation in a charging creature, how a shoulder dip could mean pain, how a pause before impact could mean memory fighting command. He never made the lessons noble, never dressed suffering in ceremony. He showed them recordings, scar charts, neural maps, and the ugly mathematics of coercion. Several officers walked out the first day, more returned the second. By the 5th day, even the priests listened without chanting, because the human doctrine did not ask them to worship mercy. It forced them to admit that mercy could be operationally superior to cruelty, and that offended them almost as much as it saved them. Jonah told them that fear was not weakness when it warned a living thing to survive, and Vaelira understood with a slow private shame that she had mistaken quiet endurance for fragility because her empire had trained her to respect only the violence it could parade. The Empire had built statues to conquerors, but the human made them study cages. The next campaign began without banners. Human specialists arrived in unmarked ships carrying black cases, trauma records, animal behavior models, and eyes too old for their faces. Imperial engineers hated how little they explained. Imperial officers hated how calmly they walked toward cages. Varkal propaganda mocked them as whisper soldiers, soft skins, corpse counselors. Until a liberated Ridgeback pack turned on a brood fortress at Pelagos 9. Until an iron tusk herd lay down in front of Imperial lines rather than charge. Until a royal dreadbeast carried 3 wounded children out of a collapsed dome in its jaws without breaking their skin. Across the border systems, the myth spread faster than orders. The humans did not defeat beasts. They asked them the question no master had allowed them to hear. "Do you want to keep hurting?" And the galaxy learned that even monsters could answer. When the war ended at the Varkal home moon, it did not end with an orbital strike. The final brood city released every creature it had left. Sky serpents, furnace hounds, siege crawlers. Blind, pale things that hunted warmth beneath rubble, the Imperial army braced for massacre. But Jonah's team activated the Karin recording one final time. Softened now, cleansed of names, still heavy with grief. The beasts gathered at the killing field and stopped. Collars flashing, bodies shaking between command and memory, Inside the Brood City, the Varkal masters panicked, because their empire had been built on the belief that pain was stronger than choice. The first caller failed near the eastern gate, then another, then 1,000. Control links snapped across the plain like rain, and the gates opened from within before sunset, years later. Children across the empire played at Karen's left. One child would be the proud princess. One would be the beast. One would raise a hand and play the human, and the beast would stop, not because it had been defeated, but because that was the miracle, the refusing, the choosing. The moment strength changed shape, Vaelira kept Jonah's cracked recording wafer in the Hall of Unforgotten Wars. Wrapped in worn cloth beside crown jewels and the surrendered Varkal command engine, visitors expected a shining weapon, but found only a damaged human relic and the words carved beneath it. Words Vaelira spoke at Jonah Vale's funeral when soldiers, freed beasts and sovereigns, stood together under a quiet sky. I called him weak because I did not understand strength. I thought courage was the power to make others face you. But the human taught us the greater power, to stand before the broken and monstrous, and make even war itself look away.